What are some of the motives that you've heard about people coming to St. Augustine? I'm trying to think about what Menendez was up to. How can we replicate that emotion, that experience? Why did he come here?
Because the French ruled St. John's River.
Okay, so the French, we have a military reason. Anyone else heard of anything over the last few days? What?
He was supposed to found a colony.
Okay, supposed to found a colony and set up kind of an enterprise. The opportunities that awaited him and his family. Any other reasons?
Save the Indian souls.
Okay, and a religious reason.
We're also looking for a safe port. It's defensible.
Okay, and a safe port for the fleets that would come through and for protection. You guys are doing really good. Another reason I heard that really resonated with me, because I have a son, he was also here looking for his lost son. And some of his motives were already set into place before they realized the French were even here. So I included a few things. Definitely the French in Florida being a motivator militarily. And you know, out at the Fountain of Youth, you can also see that's our archaeological park a couple miles north of town. Some of us are very familiar and have volunteered there. Some of us have never heard of it. So I'm trying to bridge a little gap of information there. But that's a site north of town where Menendez landed in 1565, came ashore, and there are archaeological features scattered throughout the Fountain of Youth and Nombre de Dios that relate to that military occupation. One thing is the existence of wells that are located throughout the town. Almost any military site in St. Augustine also has a well associated with it, because if people were camped out there, they had to meet their basic needs, even along the Rosario line and other reinforcements in town. It's the presence of those wells that let us know it was an activity of the crown going on around. So also out at the Fountain of Youth, there are these sleeper logs. Maybe Dr. Deegan talked about them last night, about possible munitions buildings and other outbuildings. If you go out to Fountain of Youth today, they're roped off for you so you can look and see where some of these buildings were. And that's again based on archaeology. Here's another kind of motive I'll get at by way of, do I have a pointer? I'll point. There is the day before Menendez lands and claims the land for Spain, he sent 2 old sailors, and I've seen between 200 and 300 people ashore to go fortify the land. And this could possibly be the first fort of St. Augustine. If it's not the first fort, we're looking for something like that. And by we, I don't mean me. I mean Dr. Deegan and her crew that have been out there for 30 years excavating over at the Fountain of Youth. But they did throw me in a unit this past summer, let me get digging, and found that this trench, when the crews came ashore, the 2 men there, and they're digging in their line, they had to fortify an existing council house that was already there that was given to them, a larger native structure. So they dug in that trench, fortified the housing, and then Menendez came ashore and they claimed. So I'm also thinking of those people and their motives, because they were maybe not looking for their lost son or necessarily going to be gaining from the opportunity of the enterprise of Florida, but they're representing their regions, their towns, their villages, and also tying into the theme of protection of why they came ashore to fortify. They're a little nervous about what else could be out there. And this it's not actually a painting of the man I'd like to talk about, but Martin Yustango. I keep looking at Sam because he speaks Espanol, so I keep thinking he will be magically producing a well-pronounced name. But he was an architect that came over with Pedro Menendez and was one of the main architects that helped build the city. So in the theme of Michael Francis, who started this week for me on Monday up at Jacksonville with the dead guys I'd like to have a beer with, I'd like to have a beer with this guy and say, you know, how did you build, what were you thinking of? What what was your connection, and finding, people have already done this. Manussi wrote an article where he looked at the folk architecture of areas of Spain and found some of the areas in Spain up to the 1940s of fishing villages looked a lot like what we would expect to see in St. Augustine in the 16th century, where the posts were located, the size of the structures. We had 7.5 people living in these houses, these domestic houses. So this also speaks a little bit of motive to me, that maybe regional pride and wanting to carry on your provincial culture as well. And we talked about some of the Catholic, the saving their souls, and the missionary period. And the mission has begun at Nombre de Dios and stays there even after the military leaves, and continues to kind of move south closer to town over time. You can come back next year for my 17th century talk, and we'll talk even more about the missions, but I'm just going to focus mostly on 16th century today. Moving into town in the 70s and published in the 80s is the work of Kathy Deegan, who did auger testing, shovel testing, and unit testing later on, trying to find the boundaries of St. Augustine downtown. This is well, for one, that's an important moment for historical archaeology, because her methods, what she put together, also looking at how other people were looking at colonial Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, South Carolina. The sampling method she used is really one of the first of its kind. And she went through the downtown area. She was looking for lifeways associated with the 16th century. And a lot of what she found and later published on, let's see what my next slide is, it speaks to the overall Spanishness of downtown, a very conservative house plot setting, goes back to medieval times, and this includes the layout of the town, how the streets are done, how the individual house lots are played out, all the way to what's probably the most concrete for me is how people are buried. This is continuing a Spanish, a very Catholic tradition that's also very conservative. So in her writings of looking at St. Augustine, this kind of almost 200-year period where not a lot changes, one of the features that she finds, also like out at Fountain of Youth and other places, are these wells. And you do need water to meet basic needs, but it also showed the uniformity in which she found the wells and the uniformity in which they were from the road and measured to the walls. There's a very set pattern, a very Hispanic household pattern that continues downtown with all the plots that she studied. Also, diversity. I didn't used to think of colonial St. Augustine as being a very diverse community, but it really was. You had Spanish soldiers, but that included people who were Irish, people who were of other descent groups, and also a lot of Native Americans who were in the town intermarrying, and you have creolization that she probably talked about more elegantly another time. And I didn't know until recently that, you know, they were finding all this data downtown, studying the households. The reason that she went out to Fountain of Youth to begin with is they wanted an area outside of town to contrast with what they were finding in town. And that led to her discoveries out at the Fountain of Youth. So it's kind of interesting. It's like in the timeline, that comes first and then downtown. But in her digging life, she was downtown and had the interest to move back out that way to compare what she was finding here. There's not a lot of luxury items in St. Augustine at that time. Diversity is seen through the different European ceramics that are brought in, but a lot of native traditions are being sustained in town, and you have this pottery that develops that has indigenous clay and technology, but expressing European forms. And this is what's found in predominantly all the households downtown. So you kind of see this interesting European and native mixing there, and that's getting in a lot of ways through the women and the intermarrying between the groups. We also had a request not long ago from a woman who was looking into this African nurse that worked in town, and I threw this in there because it's another moment of me thinking like, wow, I hadn't really thought about all the Africans that were also in town and represented in the cemeteries, represented in the parish records. But this woman who is not depicted here, it just made me go and look to see, what do 16th century nurses look like? None of them are by just visual expression African, but it's interesting that she was here, that she was called upon by the governor, and also the different occupations that were around in St. Augustine at that time. Michael Gannon at the unveiling of Soledad made a really good point that just because the first hospital, Soledad, was located downtown, that didn't mean that's the first instance of nursing, that a lot of caregiving was going on in the homes and by the families. So to say, you know, so-and-so is the first nurse, it's really impossible to make that. And I got really obsessed with some of the cemetery work done at Los Remedios and over at Soledad. And thanks to the St. Augustine Archaeology Association, there are some panels that you can see now that tell you about the history of those sites. And again, just the way the burials are done. Let me see. I meant to leave one cheat sheet out. Because some of the patterns there, at Soledad, they lack worldly possessions. They're interred directly into the bare earth. Their hands are over their torso in a prayerful expression. They're all facing east to west. There's only one rosary, I think, found, and all the individuals found. And there are Spanish or men of European descent. There are men of native descent. There are men, women, children, African descent. There are no native women found in the cemetery at Soledad, so I found that interesting. I don't know at the time where they are, but they are not there at Soledad. But again, shows the diversity, but again, this conservative theme that not a lot changes in the burial practices over that time versus when the British come and everything turns upside down. I put this on a blog recently, and somebody sent me an email like, I think you're overusing the word poverty. So I just want to say, I think I was thinking of this when I was trying to demonstrate that if you have somebody holding up gold in downtown St. Augustine, I don't believe it came from downtown St. Augustine. We were not a colony of great wealth, as Sam was talking about the sources of gold. Florida doesn't have it. So if there were signs of luxury, it's really in comparison of looking at other colonies, you can say, well, we didn't have the expressions of wealth that other colonies had. And then my final theme is this one of catastrophic events, natural and cultural ones hitting us all the time. Eugene Lyon, in one of his articles, said it's like in 1580 they hit a reset button again, just from the hurricanes, from the attacks, from the massacres. And then comes along Sir Francis Drake and the Golden Hindi, and this is a 20th century replica of what the ship might have looked like as it approached and raided St. Augustine. We have this map and others on view, if you haven't seen them, at the St. Augustine Historical Society, where the oldest house is, a really nice map exhibit. But these were made by Boazio trying to show the glory that was Drake and the English interests. But they're a good resource. It's the first, the Boazio map is the first city mapped in the US.